Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The Naval Intelligence Operations Room pulsed with low conversation and the soft hum of machinery. Sunlight filtered through reinforced glass, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air, fragments of light in a room built for war. Around the central table, officers gathered in crisp uniforms, their laughter blending with the rhythmic tapping of digital styluses on glass displays. She stood apart. Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison, the quiet one no one quite understood. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, her silence steady enough to make others uncomfortable. She didn't talk unless she had to, didn't smile unless it served purpose. After 5 years stationed at Norfolk Strategic Operations Center, her reputation had become its own kind of armor. Calm, efficient, distant. But distance wasn't indifference, it was defense. She had learned that in darker places, places the people in this room would never see and never want to. The doors hissed open, conversations died instantly. Admiral Preston Westfield entered, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and carrying authority like a weapon. At 52, his uniform gleamed with more decorations than sincerity. His expression didn't change as he scanned the room, as if already disappointed by what he saw. Let's begin the strategic assessment. His voice carried easily, trained by years of command and criticism. Selene didn't move, but her mind switched gears. She studied the simulation parameters since dawn, a contested waters scenario in the South China Sea, layered with asymmetric threats and political traps. Every variable mattered. For the next 40 minutes, teams presented their strategies. Most clung to doctrine: defensive tiers, perimeter control, countermeasure saturation. The same predictable playbook: efficient, safe, forgettable. Then it was her turn. Selene stepped forward without hurry, activating the central display. The room's light shifted, bathing her in a faint blue glow. Our analysis identified 3 critical vulnerabilities in the standard model, she said calmly. Her tone wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a clean blade. Fingers traced across the map, red points illuminating on the display. If we reposition our surveillance assets here and here, we reduce exposure while maintaining full intelligence coverage. It's a low-cost shift with high return. A few officers nodded. The logic was irrefutable. Additionally, she continued, by using these secondary observation points, we maintain persistent tracking even if the enemy changes position. Flexibility, not fortification, wins the data war. That last line drew murmurs. Even the Admiral's brow twitched. He didn't like improvisation, he liked control. Westfield's voice cut through the air. Your approach disregards protocols 5 through 7 for naval engagement in disputed territories. Selene didn't flinch. With respect, Admiral, those protocols assume symmetrical conflict. This scenario doesn't. The silence that followed was fragile. A few seats down, another officer, Lieutenant Commander Abernathy, spoke up hesitantly. She's right, sir. The Morrison approach gives us more flexibility. I ran a similar simulation last month. It matches her results. The Morrison approach. The phrase hung in the air longer than anyone expected. The Admiral's expression darkened. He didn't like new names attached to old playbooks, especially not hers. He turned sharply toward a technician. Lieutenant Everett, pull up the team assignment matrix. Let's see who's actually qualified for tactical planning. The tech complied, fingers gliding across the display. One by one, personnel files filled the big screen, crisp, complete, predictable. Then came hers. Her record appeared for barely 2 seconds before everyone noticed it. The redacted lines, thick black bars cutting through her service history like scars, missing deployment dates, classified operations, transfers that led nowhere. Go back, Westfield ordered. The screen froze on her file. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, There seem to be inconsistencies in your record." The room shifted. Eyes moved toward her, curiosity blooming like heat. Selene kept her gaze fixed on the display. "Those are standard clearance redactions, sir." "Standard?" Westfield stepped closer, folding his hands behind his back. "Half your career is missing. That's not standard, Commander. That's suspicious." The tension thickened. Officers exchanged looks, some sympathetic, some eager for spectacle. "Perhaps," the Admiral continued, "you'd like to clarify for all of us how someone with an incomplete record gets assigned to strategic planning. I believe the exercise parameters." "We'll address that later." His tone sliced through her words. "First, transparency. It's important the officers here understand who's offering them guidance." Selene said nothing. Inside, though, her pulse had slowed to something steady, almost measured. She'd faced worse: interrogation lights, bleeding corridors, the silence that follows detonation. A man in a pressed uniform with a superiority complex didn't even register on her scale of threat. But humiliation, that was different. Not for her, for the others. The younger officers watching, learning the wrong lesson. Across the room, one of them, Lieutenant Ezra Rivera, sat unusually still. He was new to the intelligence division, fresh from field ops, still carrying the instinct of someone who had seen more dust than paperwork. And as the Admiral continued his dissection, something about Morrison's calm expression nagged at him. He'd seen that face before, not here, somewhere else, in a story maybe, a briefing, a mission file from years ago. He touched the small scar on his forearm, a habit from old memories. Meanwhile, the Admiral was circling like a shark. "Special operations experience, yet no unit listed," he said mockingly. "Overseas deployments, no locations. Citations without sponsors. Curious pattern, Commander, almost as if someone fabricated it." Laughter, soft but real, rippled from the back rows. Selene's jaw tightened, the only visible crack. "Perhaps you never actually earned your field credentials," Westfield pressed. "After all, your record doesn't mention a call sign. Strange, isn't it? No operator without one. So tell us, Commander, what was yours?" The room held its breath. Her answer came slow, quiet, steady: "Legend." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Westfield chuckled. "Legend? How poetic." He turned to the room. "You see, this is what happens when narrative overtakes fact. Legend, really." But the young lieutenant in the corner, Rivera, had gone pale. He was no longer looking at the Admiral. He was looking at her wrist insignia, the faint outline of a specific operational seal, one he'd seen only once, years ago, during an emergency debrief in Bagram. He stood. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking slightly. The Admiral shot him an irritated look. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "Legend wasn't a story, sir. It was a call sign, used by the operator who executed the Khyber Pass extraction in 2019. The silence that followed wasn't quiet, it was electric. That operation rescued 16 servicemen trapped behind enemy lines," Rivera continued, voice gaining strength with every word. "After their convoy was ambushed in the Khyber Mountains, every man thought lost until one operator, call sign, Legend, brought them out." Several heads turned sharply toward Selene. The Admiral blinked, confused. "That operation's details are classified." "Yes, sir, but the survivors talk about it, quietly, among themselves." Rivera's voice had steadied now, a controlled burn. "One of those men was Captain Michael Westfield, your brother." The Admiral's face lost color like someone had flipped a switch. "He didn't speak, couldn't." Selene didn't move either. Her silence said enough. The room erupted, soft gasps, hurried whispers, the realization spreading like shockwave. A senior officer murmured, "I thought Legend was a man." "That was intentional," Rivera said quietly. "Operational security." Selene stood motionless, not denying, not confirming, and yet the truth had already filled the room. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then the Admiral's voice cracked, stripped of command. "That's impossible." Rivera looked him dead in the eye. "Your brother carries a modified dog tag, sir. It's stamped with the word legend. He told me every man rescued that day had one made, a reminder of the debt they could never repay." The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, Selene gathered her data tablet, placed it neatly on the table, and spoke with the same calm tone she'd used all morning. "The exercise parameters still need finalization, Admiral. The teams are waiting." Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Every officer in the room, including the ones who had laughed, stood at attention as she passed. No one had told them to. It just happened. The door closed softly behind her, but the echo stayed. In the sudden quiet, Admiral Westfield stood staring at the frozen screen, her redacted file still glowing. The same file he had weaponized moments earlier. Now those black bars no longer looked like lies. They looked like sacrifice. Outside, the corridor was quiet. Selene walked alone, boots striking the tile with measured rhythm. The air smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant, familiar, unfeeling. Her expression remained unreadable. But her pulse betrayed her. It thudded heavy against the inside of her ribs, not from fear, not from anger, but from memory. The mountains, the cold, the silence between gunfire. She buried that version of herself years ago. Legend wasn't a name, it was a ghost. And ghosts weren't meant to walk these polished halls. As she reached the exit, sunlight broke across the glass again, scattering dust into light. For a second she stopped, not to look back but to breathe. Quietly, because dignity doesn't shout. It simply stands its ground. What does a man do after his pride collapses in front of everyone? Admiral Preston Westfield sat alone in his office long after the briefing room had emptied. The walls were quiet now, but the silence was heavier than any reprimand he had ever given. He had spent a career mastering command tone, projecting certainty, dominance, authority. Yet one word had cracked it open like glass. Legend. He whispered it once under his breath, as if testing whether it still meant what he thought it did. A name he'd heard years ago, always wrapped in myth. The ghost who walked the mountains. The one the after-action reports never named. He'd never imagined she'd been standing in his own command for 5 years, speaking softly, analyzing quietly, never demanding to be seen. Westfield leaned back in his chair, staring at the frozen image on his wall display. Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison. Those redacted bars he'd mocked now glowed blood-red against the blue screen, like open wounds. A knock came at his door. He straightened, composing his face. "Enter." Vice Admiral Lysandra Harlow walked in without ceremony. She never needed permission. 58, severe-haired and sharp-eyed, Harlow commanded the Norfolk base with a reputation built on precision and fairness. Her presence always brought gravity. Today, it carried warning. "Preston," she said flatly, "I understand there was an incident during your training exercise." He exhaled slowly. "I made a grave error in judgment." "That's putting it mildly." She set a data tablet on his desk. Its screen glowed with classified markings, clearance temporarily elevated to a level even he rarely accessed. The file header read, "Operation KYBER Shield, UNREDACTED." "Read," she ordered. He hesitated, then tapped the file open. The room filled with text, photographs, mission logs. For several minutes, the only sound was the faint hum of the air system. Then his composure began to crack. He read about Lieutenant Morrison volunteering for a mission deemed non-recoverable, an infiltration through hostile mountain territory after conventional extraction had been abandoned. He saw the casualty projections, 98% fatality risk. He saw her handwritten notation beside the risk report, We don't leave people behind. He scrolled further. A timeline of actions, solo infiltration, location of survivors, coordination of makeshift rescue, engagement with enemy forces, multiple injuries sustained. Medical notes, bullet wound to the shoulder, shrapnel embedded in the left cheek, hypothermia. Final outcome, all 16 personnel recovered alive, 0 friendly casualties. Westfield's throat tightened. He reached the end of the file, her debrief transcript. The interviewer asked why she refused evacuation until all others were secure. Her reply, leadership means ensuring others return before you do. He set the tablet down, hands trembling slightly. She never used this, he said softly, never once mentioned saving Michael's life. That's who she is, Harlow replied. Her tone softened, not sympathetic but respectful. The best operators don't tell war stories. They don't need to. He looked up at her, eyes hollowed. What do I do now? Harlow studied him for a long moment. Start by remembering what real service looks like. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. And perhaps reconsider what strength actually means. The door closed behind her, leaving him alone with the glowing screen. The room felt colder now. For years, he'd believed leadership was about projection, about being the loudest voice in the room, the sharpest authority. But reading her file, he realized how wrong that was. Leadership wasn't volume. It was quiet endurance. It was bleeding in the dark for people who might never know your name. He picked up his personal phone. The contact list glowed with a familiar name, Michael Westfield, his younger brother. For a moment he couldn't press the button, then he did. Michael, he said when the line connected. His voice came out rougher than he expected. I need to ask you something about your rescue. A pause, then his brother's guarded tone. You know I can't discuss classified details. I know who Legend is. Another silence, longer, heavier. How? Michael finally asked. She's been under my command for 5 years. Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison. On the other end, a quiet, incredulous breath. And you're just now figuring this out. I made a mistake, a significant one. Michael's laugh held no humor. Let me guess, you saw gaps in her record, assumed the worst, and made a public spectacle of it. Westfield said nothing. That silence was admission enough. Jesus Preston. His brother's disappointment carried more weight than any formal reprimand. That woman walked through hell to bring us home. She took a bullet pulling Ramirez out of the wreckage. When our water ran out, she gave us hers. When Martinez couldn't walk, she carried him. I didn't know, Preston whispered. That's the point, isn't it? You didn't know, so you assumed. Just like headquarters didn't know, so they wrote us off as losses. The truth hit like a gut punch. Michael's voice softened slightly. She never once took credit, not even when the Joint Chiefs tried to pin a medal on her, said the mission was its own reward. Preston rubbed his eyes, staring at the framed photo of the two of them at Michael's wedding. The smiles, the medals, the illusion of clarity. He'd been living inside that illusion for years. I need to make this right. You can't, Michael said bluntly, but you can learn from it. Start with remembering what courage actually looks like. The call ended. Westfield sat motionless for a long time, the hum of the ventilation filling the space where his certainty used to be. He had built a career on hierarchy, on rank and fear and unyielding standards. But none of that could match the strength of one woman who had chosen silence over glory. He felt something unfamiliar then, remorse deep enough to sting. The next morning, Selene arrived at her office at exactly 600. She always did. Discipline was her refuge. Physical training at 500. Shower and uniform change by 5:45. Desk by 600 sharp. Structure kept her steady. Routine kept her sane. She opened her console, scanning overnight intelligence summaries. maritime traffic patterns, satellite imagery, supply anomalies. Her mind moved through the data like water through stone, precise, methodical, detached. Then a soft chime broke her rhythm. Priority message, Admiral Westfield, private meeting 800. No subject line, no agenda. Selene read it once, then closed the notification. She didn't sigh, didn't frown. She simply resumed her work. Whatever awaited her, it was another variable, something to be managed, not feared. At 7:58, she stood outside his office door. The aide who had witnessed yesterday's debacle looked up nervously, unable to meet her eyes. "The Admiral will see you now, ma'am." She stepped inside. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, reporting as ordered, sir." Westfield looked up from his desk. His posture was the same, but the air around him was different, less weight, more gravity. He gestured toward the chair opposite. "At ease, Commander, please sit." She complied, posture still precise, eyes unreadable. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist in his vocabulary. "I reviewed your unredacted record," he said finally. "I assumed as much, sir. The official report doesn't begin to capture what happened at Khyber Pass, does it?" "Reports rarely do." He nodded, eyes distant. "My brother called last night, said you refused the commendation the Joint Chiefs tried to give you." "It wasn't necessary." 16 men thought differently. They all wrote letters recommending you for the Navy Cross. "The mission was its own reward, sir." The quiet conviction in her tone struck deeper than any accusation. He studied her, really studied her, for the first time. The minimal decorations on her uniform, the precise efficiency of her movements, the complete lack of self-promotion he had once mistaken for mediocrity. "Why transfer to intelligence after that mission?" he asked. "With your record, you could have written your own ticket, Special Operations Command, diplomatic security, anything." She considered her words carefully. "I'd seen enough combat. Intelligence allows me to prevent crises instead of cleaning up after them." He nodded slowly. "And the redactions in your file, they protect others." "They protect the mission," she corrected gently, "and the people who still serve." Silence filled the space again, heavier now but not hostile. "I owe you an apology," he said at last, "a significant one." "That's not necessary, sir." "It is." He drew a steady breath. "I've submitted a formal reprimand to my own record. Conduct unbecoming of an officer. What happened yesterday will not happen again to you or to anyone under my command." Selene absorbed the words quietly. She didn't smile or nod. She simply accepted them the way she accepted pain, as something to acknowledge, not to dwell on. "Is that all, Admiral?" she asked. "One more thing." He opened his desk drawer and placed a small box on the table between them. "My brother asked me to give you this. You refused it once." "She didn't touch it." "He had it made after the extraction," Westfield said. "All 16 of them did. They carry them as reminders." Slowly she opened the box. Inside lay a dog tag, simple, stainless, unadorned except for one word, legend, and the date of the Khyber operation. Her thumb traced the letters once. Then she closed the box and pushed it back across the desk. "The mission was its own reward," she repeated softly. He stood instinctively as she rose to leave. "Not out of protocol this time, but respect." "Lieutenant Commander," he said as she reached the door, "the joint exercise next month, I'd like you to lead the planning team." She turned slightly. "If that's where I'm needed, sir." The simplicity of the response hit him harder than gratitude ever could. When she left, he remained standing, looking at the small box she'd refused. In that moment he understood strength wasn't loud and humility wasn't weakness. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What changes first, a man's voice or the silence that follows him? In the days after the confrontation, something subtle shifted inside the Norfolk Naval Intelligence Center. No announcements were made, no policies rewritten, but the air felt different. Conversations grew softer when Selene Morrison entered a room, not out of fear, but respect. The same officers who had once overlooked her now paused when she spoke, listening with the kind of focus reserved for people who had earned their words through pain rather than position. Admiral Westfield, meanwhile, carried himself differently. Gone was the sharp, performative authority, the echoing reprimands that used to punctuate every morning briefing. He spoke less, but what he said carried more weight. His eyes no longer searched for faults, they searched for understanding. It was as if both of them, the silent operative and the once-proud admiral, had traded parts of themselves that day. One had revealed who she was, the other who he was. At precisely 600, Selene arrived at her office as usual. Her space was bare, deliberately so. No medals, no personal memorabilia, only a single framed photograph on the far corner of her desk, 6 figures in desert camouflage, faces hidden behind balaclavas and the sun's harsh glare. Her former team, the ghost she still carried. She set her coffee down and opened the day's reports. Satellite telemetry, vessel movement patterns, smuggling intercept data from the South China Sea. It was the kind of work she preferred, quiet, analytical, important only to those who understood what was at stake. A soft knock interrupted her focus. "Come in," she said. Lieutenant Ezra Rivera entered, holding a tablet under his arm and wearing an expression halfway between reverence and hesitation. "Morning, ma'am. I brought the latest signal intercepts from the Taiwan sector." "Set them on the desk," she replied. He did, but didn't leave. His stance betrayed curiosity he couldn't suppress. "Permission to speak freely, Commander." "Granted." He exhaled. "You were the one at Khyber Pass. The stories, they never said your name. They always said legend was some myth, some larger-than-life soldier." Selene didn't look up from the data display. Legends usually start that way. "But they're all true, aren't they? The rescue, the mountains, the gunfire." She stopped him with a quiet glance. Not stern, just enough to remind him that some truths aren't meant to be retold. "Some missions," she said softly, "belong to the people who survived them, not the ones who talk about them." He nodded, chastened, but his admiration only deepened. "Understood, ma'am. Still, my brother was one of the 16, Lieutenant James Rivera, communications officer." That made her look up. "I remember him," she said. Her tone didn't change, but her eyes softened slightly, a flicker of warmth buried beneath discipline. "He said you destroyed all classified equipment when your team was compromised, then came back for them, alone." "They performed admirably under pressure," she replied simply. "You should be proud." "I am, ma'am." He hesitated again, shifting the tablet in his hands. He still tells that story during SEAL training, about the operator who refused to leave them. They call it the miracle at Khyber. Selene's gaze drifted toward the window. Outside, sunlight shimmered across the base's parade grounds, where cadets ran drills in perfect rhythm. "The story serves its purpose," she said quietly. "Names don't matter, lessons do." She turned back to her screen. "Now these intercepts. You've highlighted 3 anomalies." He blinked, realizing she'd redirected him. "Yes, ma'am. 2 are probably false positives, but this one," he tapped the tablet, enlarging a waveform pattern, "looks like coordinated relay activity, not civilian chatter." She studied it carefully. "Good catch, flag it for extended analysis, and Lieutenant." He straightened instinctively. "Yes, ma'am." "Next time, lead with your observation, not your admiration." A hint of a smile ghosted across her face before vanishing. Rivera flushed slightly but smiled too. "Yes, ma'am." When he left, she sat back in her chair. The world always found new soldiers, young, idealistic, eager to serve. What mattered was shaping that idealism into discipline before life did it brutally. Later that morning, the operations auditorium filled again, but this time the air was different. Admiral Westfield stood before the gathered officers. No grand speeches, no sharp rebukes, just a man who looked for once like he'd learned how to listen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice quieter than usual but carrying further somehow. "Last week's incident reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about clarity, seeing value where arrogance might blind us." The room shifted uneasily, knowing what he referred to but grateful he didn't name it. "Our next phase will focus on integrated intelligence, analysis, logistics, operations. I expect full cooperation across ranks and disciplines." He paused. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison will oversee strategic coordination." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some officers exchanged looks of surprise, others of approval. Morrison remained at her seat near the back, expression unreadable, but every detail of her bearing, the calm, the posture, the quiet focus, spoke louder than any applause could. When the meeting adjourned, Rivera caught up to her outside the hall. "They're listening to you now," he said quietly. "They're listening to the mission," she corrected. "Maybe, but it's different now. You changed the atmosphere." She didn't answer. Some truths didn't need acknowledgement. As she walked away, Rivera watched her go, realizing for the first time that influence didn't always shout from podiums. Sometimes, it walked quietly past you, leaving the air heavier with meaning than before. Over the following weeks, the change spread. Westfield's leadership style evolved almost imperceptibly. He started asking questions instead of issuing commands. He began mentoring instead of evaluating. The officers noticed and adjusted accordingly. The morale that had once felt stiff now carried quiet purpose. He never mentioned the incident publicly, but word traveled in military circles faster than any official report. Everyone knew, and everyone respected the silence with which it was handled. As for Selene, she continued exactly as before. No new decorations appeared on her uniform. No interviews, no acknowledgments. She moved through her duties with the same efficient rhythm, mentoring when asked, correcting when needed, and working long after others had left for the day. Rivera became a regular presence in her office. What began as curiosity became mentorship. She saw potential, the kind that could either harden or burn out. She guided it carefully. "The key," she told him one evening, as satellite images flickered across their shared display, "is not collecting more data. It's recognizing which patterns matter." He leaned forward, intrigued. "So it's not about quantity. It's about clarity. Intelligence is 10% collection, 90% interpretation. Learn to separate noise from signal. That's how you save lives." He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "My brother said you did that at Khyber," he said. "When communications failed, you found a way through static, filtered out the interference to guide them home." Selene's expression stayed neutral. "Your brother was brave under fire. I only gave direction. They found the strength to follow it." Rivera smiled faintly. "He said you walked through a snowstorm with a bullet wound." "Then he's mistaken," she said, without missing a beat. "It was a blizzard." The corner of her mouth curved just slightly, the closest she ever came to humor. Rivera laughed quietly. It felt strange, laughing in her office, but the sound wasn't unwelcome. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, "for everything." "Don't thank me," she replied. "Just remember what you're learning. Someday you'll need it." 3 weeks later, the training center held its largest classroom session in months. A new intake of intelligence officers, fresh from academy programs and filled with ambition. Westfield stood before them, his posture calm, his tone reflective. "Naval intelligence," he began, "isn't about glory. You won't see your names in headlines. Your victories will remain classified. Your failures will never make sense to anyone outside these walls." He paced slowly, eyes moving across the sea of faces. "You'll hear stories about operators who became legends, ghosts who accomplished the impossible. You imagine them as invincible. But here's the truth." He paused, voice softening. "The greatest strength often lives in those who never feel the need to prove it." His gaze drifted toward the back of the room, where Selene stood observing quietly, unnoticed by most of the class. "The most effective officers," he continued, "are often the ones you'd pass in a corridor without realizing who they are. Remember that before you judge someone's worth by their silence." He let the words linger. Then he gave a small nod toward her, almost imperceptible. She returned it, equally restrained. By the time the class looked back, she was gone, as she preferred. Back in her office, Selene sat at her desk once more. The room was dim now, lit only by the soft glow of her screen. Outside, the base had grown quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only after long workdays and long regrets. On her desk, the framed photograph caught the last streak of sunlight. 6 figures in sand and shadow. She touched the edge of the frame gently. She didn't keep medals, but she kept memories. She turned to her work again, surveillance grids, updated maritime overlays. Somewhere out there, another crisis was building, another storm forming before the weather radar caught it, and she would be there to see it before anyone else did. Because that was her purpose, not recognition, not redemption, just service. The kind that needed no audience. Outside her window, the last light faded, swallowed by the blue hush of evening. And in that silence, legend went back to work. How do you face someone who only knows the myth of you? 3 weeks later, dawn broke over the Norfolk Naval Training Range, a pale light spilling across endless rows of hangars, antenna arrays, and satellite dishes that turned slowly toward the horizon like metal sunflowers. The base pulsed with controlled energy. Drills, orders, distant shouts, the low whir of engines preparing for the Joint Operations Intelligence Exercise, the largest simulation of the year. Selene Morrison walked through the command corridor with her usual precision. Her uniform was pressed, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. To most observers, she looked like every other officer, efficient, composed, disciplined. Only those who knew her closely understood that her silence wasn't emptiness. It was focus. At 600, she entered the operations planning room. Digital maps stretched across every surface, the South Pacific, the Middle East, the high seas. Officers and analysts prepared their data feeds, checking calibration and communications protocols. The air was sharp with tension and caffeine. Selene placed her folder on the central console. "Begin Phase 1, she instructed. Her voice was calm, but her mind moved like clockwork. 52 scenarios, 7 unpredictable variables, 6 interconnected agencies, all converging on a single simulated mission, multi-branch hostage extraction under live data conditions. It wasn't combat, but the planning demanded the same clarity, the same instinct that had kept her alive once before. On the far wall, Admiral Preston Westfield stood quietly, hands clasped behind his back. His transformation over the last month had become evident to everyone. He spoke less now, but when he did, officers listened. His arrogance had been replaced by something unfamiliar, humility that carried more command than his former tone ever had. "Proceed, Commander," he said simply. Selene nodded, "Yes, sir." The room dimmed as the main display activated. Tactical overlays shimmered across the screens. A digital simulation of a coastal facility materialized, surrounded by red and blue markers representing friendly and opposing forces. "We'll run real-time integration between intelligence and field teams," she explained. "This will test our coordination under unpredictable shifts. Intelligence timing, not force volume, will determine success." Several senior officers exchanged glances. They knew what that meant: her style, precision over aggression, subtlety over spectacle. Outside the observation glass, a group of visiting officers entered the facility. Selene barely glanced up until she recognized one of them. He was taller than she remembered, broader shoulders, faint streaks of silver in dark hair. His uniform bore the insignia of Special Operations Command, and a faint scar traced along his jaw, a reminder of shrapnel. Captain Michael Westfield. For a fraction of a second her breath caught. She recovered instantly. Her eyes returned to the screen, but her pulse no longer obeyed her discipline. He was the last man she had pulled from the Khyber wreckage 6 years ago. He had been unconscious for most of the extraction, concussed, bleeding, carried through freezing terrain under fire. He'd never seen her face clearly, just the faint outline of a helmet and a voice telling him to hold on. Now he stood a few feet away, whole, decorated, alive, because of a woman he didn't know. And because the world had never learned her name, he didn't know that woman was standing right in front of him. The exercise began. Selene's intelligence team monitored live feeds from reconnaissance drones and data simulations. Her commands were quiet, precise, almost surgical. Shift recon drone Bravo 2 south by 4 degrees. Adjust relay uplink. Increase signal fidelity to 70%. Feed tactical overlay to Alpha Team on Channel 4. Her analysts moved with disciplined speed. The simulation evolved smoothly, every decision rippling through the scenario like a controlled tide. Halfway through, the observers entered the control center. Michael Westfield took a position near the back, watching the operation unfold. His eyes moved across the screens, then toward the woman at the console. There was something in her posture, an old, practiced steadiness. Familiar. He didn't know why it felt that way, but it did. As the simulated extraction neared completion, Selene's team identified a secondary hostage location, a hidden transfer point that hadn't been in the mission brief. "Mark it," she said immediately. "Signal all units. Priority reallocation, Alpha Team divert to Grid 7-2. Within minutes, the simulation's outcome shifted. The hostage rescue succeeded without a single simulated casualty. Efficiency, total. Observers began to murmur. The Joint Chiefs representative leaned toward Admiral Westfield. That was exceptional coordination. "Her doing," the Admiral said quietly. Selene didn't turn as the room erupted in subdued applause. She didn't react to praise, never had. But as the applause faded, she felt someone's gaze linger on her. Michael's. He was studying her face, not out of recognition yet, but with a deep, searching curiosity. That evening, the officers gathered for the evaluation dinner, a formal event marking the end of the joint exercise. The room glowed with warm light, uniforms pressed, medals shining, laughter echoing across white tablecloths. Selene arrived precisely on time, as she always did. Her dress uniform was immaculate, her movements quiet but assured. She preferred the anonymity of side tables near exits, away from center stage. But tonight, anonymity wasn't granted. As she entered, Admiral Westfield rose from the head table. "Commander Morrison, would you join us, please? The Joint Chiefs representative requested your presence." Dozens of eyes turned toward her. She offered a small nod and walked forward, composed as ever. At the head table sat Vice Admiral Harlow, 2 Marine Corps colonels, and directly across from her, Captain Michael Westfield. He stood as she approached, extending his hand. "Commander Morrison," he said formally, "exceptional work today. Your team's intelligence mapping made the difference." She accepted the handshake briefly. "Thank you, Captain. Your operators executed flawlessly." Their words were professional, their tone measured, but beneath it an invisible undercurrent neither could ignore. When they sat, Vice Admiral Harlow spoke first. "Commander, Your analysis on the secondary hostage location was precise. It would have saved lives in a real operation. Thank you, Admiral. The team performed well. Don't deflect credit when it's due, Michael interjected, a faint smile in his voice. Your framework was the reason my men got to the target on time. Her eyes flickered toward him, then back to her plate. The mission succeeded because communication held. That's what matters. Conversation shifted to debriefing metrics, tactical adjustments, and integration challenges. Selene contributed sparingly, brief, exact, never embellishing. As coffee was served, Colonel Barrett raised a point. Our biggest vulnerability remains the gap between intelligence and operators. Information delays kill efficiency. Michael nodded. It's not just logistics, it's trust. Operators need to know the intel is reliable, that someone on the other end actually understands the fight. Selene spoke softly but clearly. Trust works both ways. Intelligence officers need field awareness. Operators need analytical grounding. One without the other is blindness. All conversation stopped. Every head turned toward her. Her words carried neither bravado nor challenge, only truth. Admiral Harlow leaned back, intrigued. You speak as someone who's lived both worlds. Selene met her gaze briefly. Some of us have. No elaboration, no need. The silence that followed was acknowledgement enough. When the dinner ended, officers scattered into small clusters of quiet conversation. Selene stood to leave, her instinct pulling her towards solitude again, until a voice stopped her. Commander, Michael said from behind her, a word if you have a moment. She turned. He gestured toward a quiet corner near the glass doors overlooking the training grounds. The night outside was still, the faint hum of generators blending with distant waves. They stood apart from the others, uniforms glinting under the muted light. I've wanted to thank you properly, he said, for today's operation and for something else. She regarded him evenly. Something else. My brother told me what happened at Khyber Pass. A long pause. You refused the dog tag, didn't you? He said softly. He said you didn't think it was necessary. Her eyes lowered slightly. It was. To you maybe, to us it was. He reached into his jacket pocket. 16 of us carry these. He opened his palm. Inside lay a small silver tag engraved with one word, Legend. I know you'll probably refuse again, he said, but I want you to have it anyway. For a moment neither spoke. Then she reached forward, took the tag gently, and turned it over in her hand. Her thumb brushed the engraved letters, worn, weathered, sacred in their simplicity. She told herself years ago she didn't need it. That honor was noise and recognition was distraction. But standing here, with the man she had once carried through darkness now standing tall before her, something inside her cracked, not weakness, but quiet release. I'll keep it this time, she said quietly. Thank you. Michael's smile was small, sincere. You have no idea how much that means to us. She looked out through the glass. Beyond the base lights, the horizon faded into the sea, vast, endless, unrecorded. Her voice was soft. Courage doesn't always come from the loudest acts, Captain. Sometimes it's just refusing to stop when no one's watching. He nodded slowly, and that's why you're still a legend. She shook her head gently. No, I'm just a soldier who did her job. Across the room, Admiral Westfield watched the quiet exchange. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes carried something else, reflection, perhaps even pride. He'd spent years demanding excellence through fear. Now, watching those two figures, the sister and brother of the same story, bound by an unspoken debt, he understood what leadership truly meant. It wasn't found in medals or ranks or orders shouted across a room. It was found in how one human being could stand in silence and change everyone around her. Later that night, Selene placed the dog tag on her desk beside the old photograph. The tag gleamed faintly under the soft light, Simple, solid, unpretentious. She sat for a long while, staring at it. The name Legend wasn't hers anymore. Maybe it never had been. It belonged to what she represented, the idea that strength doesn't have to roar, that sacrifice doesn't need witnesses. And as she turned off the light, leaving the tag glinting faintly in the dark, one thought lingered. Sometimes the past doesn't haunt you. It just reminds you that you survived it. What does redemption look like to a soldier who never asked for it? The morning after the evaluation dinner, the Norfolk Naval Intelligence Center stirred awake beneath a pale gray sky. Rain tapped softly against the command building's glass facade, a steady rhythm that seemed to wash away the previous day's noise. Inside, the air carried something rare, quiet pride. Officers moved through corridors with renewed focus. Conversations were measured, purposeful. For once, the tension that usually haunted these halls had given way to calm, not complacency, but cohesion. In the operations wing, Admiral Preston Westfield stood at the front of the briefing room, hands folded behind his back. The large display behind him projected debriefing statistics from the joint exercise, efficiency rates, simulated casualty percentages, signal response times. All numbers, but this time, the numbers told a story of unity instead of hierarchy. Selene Morrison entered silently, clipboard tucked under her arm. She didn't announce herself, she never did. But the moment she walked in, conversation softened, posture straightened. Even the Admiral inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable a month ago. She took her seat near the front, expression neutral, attention unwavering. Westfield began. "Yesterday's exercise," he said, voice calm but firm, "demonstrated what we can accomplish when we stop working in silos. When intelligence, operations, and logistics move as one system, not as competing branches." He paused, scanning the room. The results were near perfect: zero operational breakdowns, full mission extraction under live data conditions. That doesn't happen by accident. He looked towards Selene briefly, just long enough for everyone to notice. "It happens because leadership exists at every level," he continued, "because quiet excellence has room to lead." No one spoke, no one needed to. He moved on to tactical analysis, technical improvements, integration protocols, but his tone carried something deeper than a report. It carried humility, a quiet admission that leadership was not a voice raised, but a standard lived. When the debriefing ended, officers began to disperse. Selene gathered her materials quickly, as always efficient, discreet. But before she could leave, Westfield's voice stopped her. "Commander Morrison," he said, "a word, please." The room emptied slowly, curious eyes stealing glances as they passed. By the time the last door closed, the space felt smaller, the air heavier, with the quiet history between them. Westfield gestured toward an adjoining office. "This way." The side room was simple: maps, 2 chairs, a muted light flickering from the window. Westfield waited until the door closed before speaking. "Command has requested you for a special assignment," he said without preamble. "A new interagency task force under Naval Intelligence Command. Counterterrorism analysis, direct support to field operations." Selene's expression didn't change, but her heartbeat shifted pace. "Why me?" "Because your record speaks for itself," he said. "And because your approach," he hesitated, "your clarity under pressure is exactly what they need." He reached across the desk, sliding a manila folder toward her. The cover was stamped classified, Priority 1. "Inside are the official details. The position's yours if you accept it." She studied the folder without touching it. "Is that your recommendation, sir?" "It is," he said simply, then added, "though I'd rather keep you here." Her eyes flicked up, searching his face, reading sincerity. He wasn't flattering her. He was telling the truth. He went on. "You've changed the way this command functions, Commander. The atmosphere, the coordination, even the way my officers think. You've shown them that competence doesn't need to announce itself." A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, just weighted. Selene finally said, "I'll review the assignment, Admiral." He nodded once. "Take your time, you've earned that right." As she turned to leave, he spoke again, quieter this time. "Commander." She paused. "It's been an honor serving with you." The words carried no ceremony, no rank, just truth. She inclined her head slightly. "And you, sir." Then she left. Outside, the corridor smelled faintly of rain. Through the tall windows, she could see water streaking down the glass in perfect lines, ordered chaos. For a moment, she stopped walking. Honored. She'd heard that word countless times in military halls, attached to medals and citations, written in speeches and carved into stone. But here, it had felt different, stripped of polish, softened by humility. Sometimes, she realized, honor didn't arrive in applause. It arrived in quiet apologies, in changed behavior, in silence that finally meant respect. By evening, she was back in her office. The day's reports were finished, data synced, operations logged. The base had gone still again, that rare lull between duty and dawn. On her desk sat two things: the task force folder, unopened, and the dog tag Captain Michael Westfield had given her. She looked at the tag legend, stamped deep into metal, and felt something shift in her chest. Not pride, something gentler, harder to name. She opened the folder slowly. Inside were operational outlines, projected personnel charts, communication structure. A note from command signed by Vice Admiral Harlow herself. "Your background uniquely qualifies you to integrate intelligence with field operations. You've spent your career preventing crises others react to. We need that foresight, LH." Selene closed the folder. Her decision was forming even before she realized it. But before she could reach for her console, another knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. Lieutenant Rivera entered, holding a digital tablet. "The latest South China Sea analysis, ma'am. Also," he hesitated, shifting awkwardly, "congratulations on the new assignment." She raised an eyebrow. "Word travels fast." "Yes, ma'am, faster than the encryption line." He grinned faintly. Selene motioned to the chair across from her. "Sit down, Lieutenant." He obeyed, posture straight. "Your pattern recognition work last week. It was good," she said. "You caught a false signal before it triggered an alert chain. That's the kind of precision this field needs." "Thank you, ma'am. You taught me to look for what isn't there." She studied him for a moment. "That's a useful habit, dangerous too if you start seeing ghosts." He smiled slightly. "My brother says you always see the truth before anyone else does, even when you don't want to." "Your brother exaggerates." "He also asked me to give you a message." Rivera reached into his uniform pocket and produced a folded note. "He said the 16 are having their annual reunion next month. They'd be honored if you attended." Selene's hand lingered over the note, but she didn't take it. "Tell him I'll consider it." Rivera nodded, standing to leave. But before he reached the door, he hesitated. "Ma'am, may I ask something personal?" "Within reason." "Why do you stay so quiet about everything? The operation, your record, even the Admiral's apology. Most people would." "Use it," she finished for him. He nodded. She regarded him with that same steady calm that had silenced rooms. "Because recognition doesn't change what happened. It only changes how people look at it. I prefer they look at the work, not the story." He thought about that for a moment, then said softly, "The story still matters." She almost smiled. "Then tell it well, Lieutenant, just don't make it about me." When he left, the room fell quiet again. Night deepened. The rain had stopped. Only the hum of electronics filled the space. Selene opened her console one final time and began typing her acceptance of the task force position. Her fingers paused over the confirmation field. Once she pressed send, everything would change again, new command, new protocols, new distance. But that was fine. Movement was her constant. Stillness made her restless. She signed her name. LT-CMDR, Selene Morrison accepted. The console chimed softly, decision sealed. She leaned back, exhaling. The dog tag still rested beside the keyboard, catching the reflection of the screen. For a long moment she just stared at it. She once refused to keep it because she didn't want to carry the past. But now she understood it wasn't a symbol of what she'd done. It was a reminder of why she still did it. Her strength didn't come from medals or missions. It came from persistence, the will to keep serving, even when no one was watching, even when the world only saw the myth and not the person behind it. She reached out and closed her hand around the tag. It was cool against her skin, heavy in a way that felt right. Outside, dawn was beginning to break again, soft gold light stretching across the wet tarmac. A new day, a new mission. And a woman who would keep doing what she'd always done. Serve without seeking, lead without needing, and protect without being seen. Because the truest legends aren't built from glory. They're built from grace, the kind that never asks to be noticed. What happens when doing your job means breaking your peace? 2 weeks after accepting the task force assignment, Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison arrived at a building that officially didn't exist. It stood on the edge of the Norfolk complex. No insignia, no flag, no visitor logs. The only sign on the reinforced door read, "Restricted Access/Level 7." Inside, light hummed cold and sterile. Rows of analysts worked in silence, faces pale against the glow of data walls. Screens streamed live feeds from half a dozen time zones, satellite imagery, intercepted transmissions, encrypted field reports. The air smelled faintly of ozone and burnt coffee. Selene's new world. A commander with no unit, a legend working under a number instead of a name. "Welcome to Task Force Kilo," said Director Marcus Reed, a civilian in a suit too sharp for military halls. Former CIA liaison, eyes that never stopped calculating. "You'll oversee predictive analysis for asymmetric threats. No uniforms here, Commander, only outcomes." Selene studied him, and accountability. Reed smiled thinly. "That depends on what you find." He gestured toward a glass-walled section overlooking the operations floor. "Your team's already waiting. 4 analysts, 1 field liaison, and access to live intercepts from every branch. We're the filter before command sees the world." Selene nodded once, understood. She stepped into the transparent office. A young woman with short black hair looked up immediately. "Lieutenant Samira Khan, ma'am, Signals Specialist. It's an honor." "Honor isn't required," Selene said gently. "Accuracy is." The woman blinked, then smiled faintly. "Understood." 2 others introduced themselves. Ensign Cole Hanley, Data Modeling; Chief Petty Officer Ramos, Linguistics and Field Intercepts. The last was already seated near the window, back straight, eyes tired. "Lieutenant Ezra Rivera reporting, ma'am," he said. Selene's brows lifted slightly. "They transferred you fast." "Apparently someone requested me," he replied. She didn't confirm it, but the flicker of recognition in her eyes was answer enough. By noon, the team was knee-deep in data. Intercepted chatter from a shipping network near the Horn of Africa. A sudden cluster of encrypted shortwave transmissions along the Philippine corridor. Nothing yet linked, until Selene noticed a rhythm. "Pause the feed," she said. Hanley froze the signal stream. "There," she pointed. "Every third packet, see the embedded coordinate signature. It's not random. It's maritime relay disguised as civilian beaconing." Khan frowned. "Frequency's too low for commercial use. You think it's smuggling." "Smuggling doesn't encrypt in 12-digit sequence," Selene said. This is coordinated logistics. Someone's moving something they don't want traced. Rivera leaned over her shoulder. Could it be naval intel from another ally? If it were friendly, it wouldn't hide inside fishing vessel telemetry. She tapped her stylus, overlaying routes. A pattern emerged, a slow spiral across the Pacific, converging near Guam. Reed appeared behind the glass, watching. Selene turned toward him. We'll need higher-tier decryption clearance. That's above my authority, he said. Then escalated. He studied her a moment longer. You don't even know what you're chasing yet. I know when something, pretending not to exist, she replied. The room went still. Reed smirked faintly and walked away. Hours passed. The task force room darkened as the outside world slipped into night. Only the soft blue glow of monitors lit their faces. Rivera stretched his shoulders, exhaustion creeping in. You ever miss field work, ma'am? Selene didn't look up. Miss, no, remember, sometimes. What's the difference? One drags you backward. The other teaches you where not to go again. He considered that quietly. You think that ever changes? No, she said, but you learn to live beside it. He nodded, understanding more than she said. By midnight they had the link. 3 cargo ships, registered under false Panamanian identities, moving under cover of humanitarian supply routes. Their manifests didn't match their weights. Khan's voice broke the quiet. Ma'am, if these readings are accurate, each vessel's carrying radiation-shielded containers. Selene's hand stilled on the console. How many? 7 confirmed, possibly more. Rivera's tone hardened. That's weapons grade. Or something worse, Selene murmured. Pull satellite passes for the last 72 hours. I want thermal readings. Minutes later, the thermal data confirmed it. Concentrated heat anomalies deep within each hull. She leaned back slowly. They're moving fissile material. The room went silent. Hanley swallowed hard. We have to alert command. Selene exhaled through her nose. Not yet. Not yet, Khan echoed, confused. If we alert them without proof of destination, they'll scramble every asset in the Pacific and scare the operation underground. We need to know where it's going. Rivera frowned. That's a risk, ma'am, if we wait. I know, she cut in softly, but sometimes speed costs more lives than patience. She turned to the team. Run predictive tracking on prevailing ocean currents, refueling points, and radio silence intervals. I want every possible endpoint by sunrise. At 300, the models finished rendering. The spiral pattern converged toward a single point, the port of Tarlac, an unassuming coastal hub south of the Philippine Sea. Ramos looked uneasy. That's civilian territory, ma'am, densely populated. Selene's jaw tightened, which makes it perfect cover. Rivera studied her face. You've seen this kind of route before. Her eyes flickered just for a second. Yes, in another life. She stood, prepare the full brief for command. I'll deliver it myself. At dawn, the conference chamber felt colder than usual. Vice Admiral Harlow sat at the head of the table, Westfield to her right, Director Reed to her left. Selene placed her folder on the table. 3 vessels, false registration, radiation-shielded cargo, predicted landfall within 72 hours. Harlow's eyes narrowed. You're certain? Yes, ma'am. Cross-verified through thermal and signal intercept. Reed interjected. We can't act on projections alone. If she's wrong, we'll provoke diplomatic fallout with 3 allied trading states. Selene met his gaze evenly. And if I'm right, thousands die. Westfield leaned forward. What's your recommendation? Intercept before port entry. Quietly. 1 surveillance drone, 2 fast response teams, no broadcasted orders. We take visual confirmation before escalation. Reed scoffed. You're suggesting we violate international maritime protocols on an algorithm's intuition. It's not intuition, she said calmly. It's pattern logic supported by 6 independent indicators. Harlow studied her, then spoke. Proceed under provisional authority. Commander Morrison, you'll coordinate remotely from Task Force Kilo. Selene nodded, understood. Reed frowned. If this goes wrong, it's your command. Then I'll take the weight, she replied. That night, Selene returned to the glass-walled operations room. The team was already in position. Feeds from reconnaissance drones shimmered on the central display. Black water, silver wakes, faint outlines of cargo ships cutting through moonlight. Her voice was calm, but every fiber of her being was alert. Drone Bravo, maintain altitude at 150 meters. Keep visual on target 1. Khan reported, thermal reading steady, internal temperature consistent with shielding. Ramos added quietly, picking up faint shortwave burst from Ship 2, encrypted. Selene leaned forward. Decrypt partials only, don't expose the trace. Minutes stretched. Then Khan whispered, got something. Phrase repeats every 30 seconds, cargo secured, awaiting dawn. Rivera exhaled, they're making port. Location confirmed. Port of Tarlan, ma'am, right on schedule. Selene's eyes narrowed. Activate visual feed. The drone's camera zoomed in. Through grainy night vision, containers glimmered faintly under deck lights. Then movement, figures, dozens of them. Ramos frowned. Too many for a simple transfer. Selene's stomach turned cold. Those aren't crew, they're handlers. Within minutes, the image sharpened. Metal cases stamped with unfamiliar insignia being loaded onto waiting trucks. Her voice stayed level, but her pulse thundered. Confirm serials. Khan magnified the feed. The numbers came into focus. Alphanumeric codes tied to stolen reactor materials from a facility reported missing 6 months earlier. That was enough. Selene activated the secure line. This is Commander Morrison. Confirm target identification. Initiate containment protocol. Admiral Harlow's voice returned within seconds. Confirmation received. Response teams en route. Commander, maintain overwatch. Copy, ma'am. She turned to her team. Keep eyes on all 3 vessels. Once they dock, disable feeds and erase traces. No one outside this room sees the raw footage. Rivera looked at her. You think Command will bury it? Command will do what Command must, she said quietly. Our job is to make sure truth survives somewhere. He hesitated. Where? She tapped her temple once. Here. By dawn, the operation was over. The cargo was seized. The official report would call it an intelligence-driven inspection. The world would never know how close it had come to disaster. Selene stood alone in the observation corridor as the first sunlight touched the sea beyond the base. Her reflection merged with the horizon, one more silhouette fading into the glass. Rivera approached quietly. We stopped it, ma'am, you were right. There's no victory in preventing what should never have happened, she said softly. He studied her profile. Does it ever get easier? No, she answered, but it gets clearer. They stood in silence, watching the sun rise over the quiet water. After a while, Rivera said, You know, if the world knew what you've done. She shook her head gently, then it would stop meaning anything. Later in her office, she removed her gloves and set them beside the dog tag. Her fingers lingered on the cold metal. She thought about Kyber, about the faces she'd carried through darkness, about the choices that never left you. And now, about the new ones, the lives she'd saved without them ever knowing it. Some debts you repay with action, others with silence. On her desk, the mission report blinked completed. She signed it without flourish. Status neutralized threat, no casualties, intelligence origin classified. Filed by LT CMDR Selene Morrison. Then she powered down the screen. Outside, the base stirred again. unaware that the world had nearly shifted overnight. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The quiet felt earned. Because for all the ghosts she carried, for all the weight of what she couldn't say, there was one truth she'd learned to live by. Sometimes, doing the right thing will never make the news. It will only make the world safer for people who will never know your name. How much truth can you bury before it starts to bury you? 3 days after the Tarlon interception, the base felt different. The halls of Task Force Kilo hummed with quiet triumph, whispers of success, unseen but felt. Officers exchanged nods of respect as Selene passed. Even Director Reed's usual smugness had softened into thinly veiled admiration. But in classified corridors, victories were dangerous things. The louder the unspoken pride, the heavier the silence that followed. Selene walked through the corridor toward the debriefing chamber, the rhythm of her boots echoing faintly. A new report was waiting, stamped in bold red letters. Confidential/command eyes only. Inside, Vice Admiral Harlow and Admiral Westfield stood near the conference table, voices low. Director Reed leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Selene entered, the conversation stopped. "Commander Morrison," Harlow began, "excellent work on the Tarlon operation. Containment was precise, zero civilian exposure." "Thank you, ma'am," she said, standing at attention. Westfield's tone was warmer. "Your coordination prevented a major incident. The President's Security Council is already reviewing protocol revisions based on your model." Reed interjected, his voice smooth. "Though naturally, none of this will bear your name." Selene turned her head slightly, eyes steady. "Naturally." Harlow sighed. "I know it's not fair, Commander, but you understand why. Officially, this was a routine inspection. The cover must hold." Selene nodded once. "I understand." But the pause that followed stretched too long. Something in the Admiral's tone, too careful, too measured, made her instincts stir. "What's the actual fallout?" she asked quietly. Reed smirked. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He pushed off the wall and walked closer. 2 of the seized ships were under covert charter by an Allied intelligence branch. The material on board wasn't intended for sale. It was part of an unsanctioned joint experiment. Selene's voice chilled. "An experiment with weapons-grade material." "Deterrence simulations," Reed said casually. "They wanted to test escalation thresholds in controlled conditions, except your task force blew the cover." Harlow spoke sharply. "That operation should never have existed in the first place. Director Reed knows that." Reed raised an eyebrow. "Officially, yes. Unofficially, the line between prevention and preparation is always thin." Selene's jaw tightened. "So we risked an international crisis to stop something our own allies started." Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome to the grown-up table, Commander." The silence in the room became suffocating. Finally, Harlow said, "The situation is being contained diplomatically, but it means the incident, and your team's role, will be sealed under classified review. You'll need to sign the clearance contract." Selene's gaze flicked toward the folder on the table. She didn't touch it. "Meaning," she said slowly, "if I sign this, the truth never leaves that folder." Harlow's voice softened. "It's the price of stability, Commander." Selene stared at the words on the page without reading them. Price of stability. She'd heard that phrase before at Khyber Pass, when higher command had buried the details of a failed op to preserve morale. Only back then, the cost had been 16 soldiers, names erased from history. And now, history was asking her to sign again. Later that night, she sat alone in her office. The rain had returned, soft and constant, drumming faintly against the windows. The lights were dimmed, the only illumination coming from her console, the clearance form still open, cursor blinking like a slow heartbeat. Her reflection stared back from the glass, calm, controlled, distant. The kind of face people trusted to make the hard calls. The kind of face that no longer showed the weight of them. A quiet knock broke the silence. "Come in," she said. Rivera stepped inside, his posture uneasy. "I heard about the debrief, ma'am. They're locking the file, aren't they?" "They are. And you're supposed to sign." She nodded. He hesitated. "You don't seem convinced." "I'm not," she said simply, "but I've been here before." He frowned. "Khyber." Her eyes lifted slowly. "You've read more than your clearance allows." "I didn't need to read. I've heard the stories," he said. "The mission that never existed, the officer who didn't break." She looked away. Every file they bury creates another ghost. Every silence becomes a scar that looks like loyalty. Rivera stepped closer. "Then why stay?" Her answer came softly. "Because walking away doesn't erase what you've seen. It just makes you watch it happen again from farther away." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence between them. Finally, Rivera said, "So what do you do now?" Selene turned off the screen. "The same thing I always do. My duty the right way, even if no one ever knows it." The next morning, the task force briefing room buzzed with restrained energy. The world was moving on, unaware of what had been averted. The Tarlon files were sealed, the data servers scrubbed. Director Reed was waiting when Selene entered. "Commander," he said with a thin smile, "congratulations. You're officially the most invisible success of the quarter." She didn't respond. He continued, "High Command is impressed. They want you to oversee an internal review team, codenamed Spectre." "What kind of review?" "Operational leaks, data breaches, anything compromising compartmentalization." Selene studied him. "You're putting me in charge of investigating people who ask too many questions." Reed's smirk widened. "That's one way to look at it." "And the other?" "The other is that we're ensuring the system functions smoothly. Sometimes the only way to protect the truth is to keep it from spreading." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes cooled. "And if the truth you're hiding isn't worth protecting?" "Then we redefine what worth means," he said smoothly. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, two predators circling the same silence. Selene finally said, "I'll run your review, but I'll decide what stays buried." Reed gave a slow, calculated smile. "Of course you will, Commander." That evening, she found herself walking along the outer docks, the sea stretching endlessly beneath the muted sky. The horizon was a thin blade of light, and the waves slapped gently against the pier. She rarely came here, too exposed, too open, but tonight she needed distance from walls and wires. Michael Westfield found her there. He wasn't in uniform this time, just a plain jacket, the kind worn by men who never truly left the field. "Hard woman to find," he said. Selene didn't turn. "That's usually the point." He walked beside her, leaning on the rail. "I heard about the Tarlon thing. Couldn't get details, everything's locked down. But the rumors—" "Rumors are safer than truth," she said quietly. He studied her face. "So it's true, then, you stopped something big." She didn't answer. He sighed. "You ever get tired of carrying everyone else's silence?" "Every day," she said, "but I carry it anyway." For a moment, the sound of the sea filled the space between them. Michael spoke again, softer now. "You know, my brother once told me something about you. He said the hardest thing you ever did wasn't pulling us out of Khyber. It was keeping your mouth shut afterward." Selene's eyes flickered toward the horizon. "Your brother exaggerates." "He doesn't," Michael said. "He said you were the kind of soldier who didn't need a witness to make her story real." She turned to face him then, just slightly, the light catching the faint scar near her temple. "A story only matters if it teaches something. Mine just teaches caution." "Caution or courage?" he asked. "Sometimes they're the same thing." He nodded slowly. And sometimes silence isn't loyalty, it's survival. She looked at him for a long moment. Exactly. Later in her quarters, Selene finally opened the sealed folder. Her signature line waited at the bottom. But instead of signing, she took a pen and wrote a single note in the margin. Truth, once hidden, becomes responsibility. Then she closed the folder, unsigned. She locked it in her drawer beside the dog tag, two symbols of silence, two weights she'd chosen to carry her own way. Outside, the night deepened. A storm was coming. She could smell it on the wind, the kind that rattled windows and made the whole base hum like a warning. And somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't over. The buried truth always found a way back to light. She just didn't know when, or what it would cost next. Sometimes the hardest orders aren't the ones you give, they're the ones you obey, knowing they're wrong. And the strongest soldiers aren't the loudest. They're the ones who learn to carry the weight of silence without letting it change who they are. What do you do when the truth you buried starts calling your name? 3 months had passed since the Tarlan operation. 3 months of sealed files, closed doors, and long nights under the cold hum of fluorescent lights. To most of the world, Lieutenant Commander Selene Morrison had vanished into her new role inside Spectre Division, quietly reviewing classified breaches and intelligence irregularities. To those who knew her, she'd become something else entirely, a guardian of truths no one else wanted to carry. But every guardian eventually finds a truth they can't protect. It began with a file. A simple one, mislabeled, misfiled, and almost invisible in the flood of Spectre's daily data audits. But something about it stopped her cold. The header read, Operation Whiteville Logistics Archive/Source, Allied Command redacted. She accessed it carefully, isolating the file from the network. The contents loaded slowly: satellite manifests, encrypted transmissions, shipment lists. And then, one line that made her heart stutter. Cargo relocation, Tarlan residual materials. Destination, Allied testing range classified. Residual materials. It didn't make sense. The fissile containers seized during the Tarlan interception were supposed to be neutralized under international oversight. Instead, this document suggested the materials were quietly repurposed, under the same authorization chain she'd reported to. She scrolled further. More data. Cross-signatures. An authorization code she recognized immediately. Director Marcus Reed. Her pulse quickened. So it hadn't ended in Tarlan. The operation hadn't been shut down, it had evolved, reborn under another name. That night, she requested a direct channel to Vice Admiral Harlow. Commander Morrison, the Admiral's voice came through crisp and calm. This line's secure. What is it? I found something, ma'am, Selene said, regarding the Tarlan assets. A pause, then measured words. Those files are sealed, Commander. With respect, ma'am, sealed doesn't mean gone. Another silence, then send me what you have. Selene hesitated. You should see it in person. Hours later, they met in Harlow's private office. The Admiral looked tired, not from age, but from years of compromise. Selene placed the datapad on her desk. Whiteville, she said, reactivated 2 weeks after the interception. The cargo we seized wasn't destroyed, it's been transferred. Harlow's eyes flicked over the data, her lips tightening. Read. Selene nodded, and someone higher signed off, but the signatures are masked, I can't see who. The Admiral leaned back, exhaling slowly. Do you know what this means? Yes, ma'am, Selene said quietly. It means someone's using containment operations to hide escalation programs. Do you have proof of the materials themselves? Not yet, but if we follow the supply nodes, we can trace the next transport. Harlow looked at her for a long time. You're walking into something that could end your career, Commander. Selene's voice didn't waver. I've already buried one truth for stability. I won't bury another for convenience. For the next 48 hours, she and Rivera worked in secret, bypassing network firewalls, piggybacking on dormant data loops, tracing transmission breadcrumbs across continents. The trail led to a remote island testing range, one used for environmental calibration experiments. Except there were no environmental signatures, only heat anomalies, nuclear-level anomalies. "Ma'am," Rivera said, eyes wide, "they're testing weapon yields under the guise of research." Selene stared at the glowing map, each point pulsing like a heartbeat. "This isn't deterrence anymore," she whispered. "It's escalation." "Do we report it?" "To who?" she said bitterly. "Half the people above us signed off." Rivera hesitated. "Then what do we do?" Her answer came quietly, like a decision she'd already made long ago. "We show them what silence costs." That night she met Admiral Westfield in the restricted hangar, the same place she'd once been dismissed, humiliated, forgotten. The smell of machine oil and metal filled the air. He turned as she approached. "Commander." "Admiral," she replied evenly. "I heard you requested this meeting off record. What's wrong?" She handed him the datapad. "Whiteville." He began scrolling, and the further he read, the grimmer his face became. "Read," he muttered. "And higher," she said. "I don't know how far it goes, but the chain includes at least 2 cross-branch authorizations." He exhaled sharply. "This is treasonous if true." "It's true," she said simply. He looked at her, not as a superior, but as someone who suddenly understood the quiet power he'd once underestimated. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Back me when they come for me," she said. By morning, the storm had reached the base. Dark clouds rolled in from the Atlantic, waves hammering the coastline like artillery. The task force building buzzed with quiet panic. Selene entered the operations floor calm, centered, her uniform crisp as ever. She could feel eyes following her, whispers spreading faster than orders. Reed was waiting in her office, flanked by 2 security officers. "Commander Morrison," he said smoothly, "you've been busy." "I do my job," she replied. "Your job," he said, "does not include unauthorized access to sealed operations." Her tone was calm, surgical. "Then maybe your definition of authorization is the problem." Reed's smirk vanished. "You overstepped, Commander, severely. I uncovered illegal activity under your directive." He took a step closer, voice low. "You don't understand how deep this goes." "Then explain it to me," she said softly. He stared at her, that calculating gaze faltering just for a second. "You think exposing this will save you. It'll destroy everything we've built." She met his eyes, unflinching. "If what you've built depends on lies, it deserves to be destroyed." The room went dead silent. Reed straightened, adjusting his cufflinks like armor. "You're finished here, Commander." She didn't move. "No, Director, you are." He frowned, and then his earpiece crackled. "Director Reed," came Admiral Harlow's voice, cold and clear. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending investigation under Article 118. Security protocols initiated." 2 Marines entered, crisp and silent, flanking him. Reed's face went pale. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "Oh, I do," Harlow replied through the comm. "I'm cleaning my house." Selene didn't speak. She just watched him being escorted out, no satisfaction, no triumph, just quiet inevitability. When the door closed, Rivera exhaled shakily. "How did you?" "Harlow had been watching," she said. "She just needed someone to pull the first thread." Days later, the inquiry began. Names surfaced, files reopened, buried evidence dragged back into the light. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer one truth became. Silence had protected corruption, not stability. Selene testified privately, her words measured and exact. She didn't embellish. She didn't accuse. She simply told the truth piece by piece, fact by fact, like disarming a minefield. When it was over, Harlow met her outside the hearing room. "You did the right thing," the Admiral said quietly. Selene shook her head. "No, I just did what should have been done the first time." Harlow smiled faintly. "That's what makes it right." Weeks passed. The storm finally broke. Director Reed was removed from service. The Whiteville program was terminated and declassified under Senate oversight. Selene's name didn't appear in any report. Her contribution remained hidden intentionally at her request. She returned to her office one last time to clear her desk. The room was empty now, stripped of its urgency. Rivera stood in the doorway. "You're leaving." "Reassignment," she said. "Field Liaison, European Command, smaller scale, less noise." He looked uneasy. "You deserve recognition, ma'am, after all this." Selene smiled faintly. "Recognition changes nothing. The people we save never know our names. That's how it should be." He nodded reluctantly. "Will I see you again?" "Probably not," she said softly. "But you'll know when the right kind of silence walks into a room." At dawn, she walked the outer pier one last time. The sea was calm now, a quiet mirror reflecting pale sunlight. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and machine oil, the smell of endings and beginnings. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the dog tag, the one engraved legend. The metal felt heavy and warm from her hand. She turned it over once, twice, then whispered, "I was never the legend." And she let it fall. The tag hit the water with a faint plink, vanishing beneath the surface, but she didn't look away. Because some stories weren't meant to be remembered by objects. They lived in people, in the quiet example left behind. Behind her, Admiral Westfield appeared, his voice steady. "You didn't have to give that up." She turned slightly. "It was never mine." He studied her for a moment. "So what will you do now?" Selene looked out over the horizon, endless, bright, alive. "What I've always done," she said. "Keep watch quietly." He smiled. "You know, I used to think strength was volume. Now I think it's this." "What?" He nodded toward her, toward the calm, the unbroken steadiness that seemed to anchor the world itself. Stillness that refuses to bend. Selene smiled faintly. "Then maybe we're finally learning the same language." He nodded once and walked away, leaving her alone with the sea. The waves rolled on, endless, indifferent, carrying with them the sound of everything she'd chosen not to say. And somewhere out there, under skies she would never see again, people lived unknowing, their safety bought by choices made in silence. She watched the horizon a while longer, then turned away, footsteps fading into the morning light. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't marked by applause. They're marked by restraint, by the decision to stand tall, do what's right, and let history stay quiet. And maybe that's how legends really end. Not in the sound of their own name, but in the silence that proves it never needed to be spoken. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.